Misument Impossibility. You got it. Before streaming was a thing, finding anime to watch in the West was a little tricky. If you happen to know a guy who had a basement full of strange stuff, then you were in luck, but that was a risky play. The safer option was to just watch Toonami, Dragon Ball Z, Outlaw Star, The Big O, and Gundam Wing. These are just a few of the titles on Toonami. But as for the title we're talking about today, you didn't see this one on Toonami, because this one had to be aired on Adult Swim. You see, the mixed marriage of violence and sex was a bit too much for Toonami. Just look at these bugs, right? I mean, come on. Do you see what I see, little shepherd boy? It's not very subtle, but it sure is bloody. This is Blue Gender, a mature mecha series from the guy who made two mecha anime I still haven't watched yet. Blue Gender is a cult classic dark and gory story, a true tale of monsters and men, one that hasn't been in the limelight for a while, although it still comes up from time to time, and chances are, if you like anime from the 90s and early 2000s, then you've at least heard of it. But the question is it good? Is it good? Is it good? Yeah, it's kind of a tough one. Blue Gender is divided up into two parts. The first half follows Yuji, a crazy kid from the late 2000s who was diagnosed with a bad haircut and an even worse case of super AIDS. He volunteered to be put into cryostasis until the eggheads came up with a cure, and he's woken up 2 decades later. Except there is no cure, the world has basically ended, and he's probably gonna die, either from the strange alien bug-like monsters called Blue, which are constantly evolving whenever the plot needs them to, and have already wiped out most of humanity, or he'll be taken out by the rest of humanity, or maybe from his own dumb decision-making.
What the hell?
A squad from a satellite out in space has been tasked with retrieving sleepers, the designation for anyone who was put into cryo before the fall. But the only surviving one they find is Yuji, which sucks. And he's woke too, which really sucks, because he was only supposed to wake up once they got back to base. But regardless, their mission is to still bring him back to their space station alive and unspoiled. However, things quickly go off script and most of them die, except for the cold-hearted mecha pilot, Marlene Angel. She escorts Yuji through the wasteland that was once our world to the closest operational shuttle site somewhere in Russia. And along the way, they fight more Blue, lose more guys, and grow closer to one another. That's the first half. The second half mostly takes place on Second Earth, the name of the space station where a small portion of people who were lucky enough not to get stranded on Earth when the Blue first broke out spend their days training and sciencing and banging to their heart's content. Also, the status of main character switches from Yuji to Marlene, but just for a little bit. They do go back to Earth eventually, and it's back to the bug killing, but there are some major personality changes with the two main leads. Marlene goes from a mission-focused ice queen to a love-struck woman intent on fixing Yuji, who went from an emotional spaz prone to preaching to something of a psychopath.
If you get between me and the Blue, then you're going to get shot at! Nothing, not even you, will stand in the way of the success of this operation!
There's also a whole bunch of new characters that get introduced because all the old ones died. And I'd name off some of the new ones, but by the time I list off all the important ones, they'd no longer be with us. But before we go any further, this video is sponsored by Sakurako. Sakurako is a monthly Japanese snack box filled with 20 traditional, authentic, artisan Japanese snacks. A true taste of Japan from the comfort of your own home. But what you get depends on the theme of the box, which changes every month. What you're seeing here is a sneak peek for the box for June, and the theme is Taste of Kyushu, the southernmost island of the main islands of Japan, a center of trade, craftsmanship, cultural exchanges, and diverse landscapes. You can read all about the island and some of its iconic locations in this little booklet, along with all the helpful descriptions of the various food items included in the box. Another thing that's included is a specialty item, a nice pair of chopsticks with some gourd and folding fan imagery. And we can't forget about the tea. Every Sakurako box always comes with some tea. And here we have Chiran Ryokucha, a flavor that's very sweet and very refreshing. Moving on to the snacks, there's the Suru no Sato marshmallow, a fluffy treat that's got an egg thing going on. I like that. Ever heard of Isa Senbei? It's a rice treat coated with this green syrupy stuff. Apparently it's a traditional snack in Kyushu, and I can see why. And that brings us to the Kyushu soy sauce arare. Love these things. I am very happy you get a whole bag of this sweet and savory snack. But these are just a few of the things I've chosen to highlight. There's also wasabi pistachios, black sesame taiko, kuzukiri, a Nagasaki honey castella, and a few other things that I will invite you to find out about on your own. after you give me money. You can get $5 off your first box when you sign up for a subscription by clicking the link in the description below and using my code. This does help the channel out, and now back to the video.
Mankind's last hope depends upon his survival.
So you'd better hold on tight.
Blue Gender. Coming up next. Adult Swim.
I would tell you that the first half of Blue Gender is the stronger half, although that's mostly because I like Fallout 3 and its aesthetic. Dilapidated cities, crawling with unholy abominations, fighting against a faction that uses big guns and metal suits. Love that stuff. But then you get to the second half and it's all about the people and political conspiracies and scientific revelations, and most of it ranges from okay to okay. Spoiler, not that you should really care because it's kind of stupid, but you find out the reason that the last leaders of humanity wanted Yuji and the other sleepers is because of his super AIDS. This disease actually enhances his fighting capabilities under the right circumstances. And so he and the others with this disease are gonna pilot special mechs and save the world. But now here's the twist. It is the world itself that's trying to kill all humans, or at least enough humans to make things go back to the Bronze Age. You see, the Earth infected humanity with the super AIDS to start a chain reaction that would lead to everything that happens in the show. Blue Gender might just be one of the most explicit examples of a story that critiques man's disposition towards destruction and his inability to be a true steward of the earth as prescribed by the good book, thanks to the Industrial Revolution and its consequences. And when I say explicit, I do mean explicit. Now, it is undeniable that Blue Gender has something to say about something. In this case, it wants to focus on humanity, both on a macro and a micro scale. What are we as a species doing to our planet? And what are we as a people doing to each other and even ourselves? Those are the kinds of questions asked by this series, and this exploration of a humanity that has lost its humanity in its fight to save humanity is an interesting topic to tackle, but the way Blue Gender chooses to tackle it is a bit gratuitous. Now, it's not inherently a problem to focus on odd sexual scenes where characters barely react as if to say, what's happening is meaningless. Because in the context of a world as grim as the one in Blue Gender, this makes sense. People drop dead every day, and half the time there's no fanfare or glorious send-off. It just happens, and whoever survives simply moves on. Despite the illusion of intimate acts, there are no real relationships here. Just people chasing what little pleasure they can find before their time is up. But now, did we really need to see the orgy room? I feel like that was a bit much. Look, dude, there's a track in the OST that's literally just called Sex. Also, and this is gonna sound very hypocritical coming from me, but there is too much rampant death in this show. Normally, I'm all for that kind of thing. But this time, I don't know, I think it's to the detriment of the story and the characters. You see, Blue Gender has some very interesting ideas that it wants to explore, but it also has a kill quota that it cannot compromise on. So most of the characters will have little to no characterization because they're really only there to be executed, and the story is required to proceed in a way that allows for said execution. So eventually things just start to come across as misanthropic, like the show is offing people just for the sake of it. And when you combine this with the ending of the show, it almost seems like Blue Gender is saying that the only way to keep us human beings from ruining our planet is,
we're just gonna kill them!
I've talked a lot about the killing of characters in this show, but I really should talk about at least one of those characters, Yuji. There's something you ought to know about this guy. He's very annoying.
お前たちはそれで俺を助けたつもりなのか？マリーンはサンプルの俺さえ無事なら生き残ってる人たちなんかどうなってもいいんだろ。
This is why I'd actually recommend watching the English dub, solely because I don't think he sounds as annoying there.
Marlene? Tell me, what kind of place is Second Earth?
Are you worried about it?
No, I've just been wondering what will happen to me after we get there.
But regardless of which version you watch, there is not a single episode where Yuji isn't complaining about something. Actually, that's a lie. There are a few episodes where he doesn't, because he's not there. But when he is there, he is constantly disobeying everyone and crying about how it's not fair that he's woken up into a world that sucks and that his saviors aren't freaking saving everyone. The show also uses him to comment on manhood. You want to know why Blue Gender is called Blue Gender? because it's about the blue gender. It also comments on the role of women to some degree, but it's much more critical of a young man's desire to go full warrior step lord and crush all his enemies, drive them before himself, hear the lamentation of their women, that sort of thing. But it's all linked to the super aids, which are actually called the B cells in the show, and sort of operate as a stand-in for testosterone. It makes you really strong but kind of aggressive. And considering all of the other things that are already attached to the B cell stuff, this is an odd way to tackle the topic. I think it would have been better to just have Yuji's perspective and ideals challenged and changed over the course of the series, through interactions with people of varying philosophies. Maybe it's a big cliche, but it might have worked in this case to have Marlene and Yuji basically switch their positions by the end, which is already kind of what happens in the show, but in practice, it's more like Marlene can't go 3 sentences without mentioning Yuji, and Yuji just gets emo for a while, and while he does change into a guy who's more mature and capable than the loser we were introduced to, he's still plenty emotional and annoying in the end. But is he so bad that he ruins the show like he ruins his underwear in episode 1? I don't think so. And it would seem the people of yesteryear didn't think so either. The Blue Gender didn't break any records, but it did do well enough for AIC to make a compilation film just a few years after it ended. Although it's a film that wasn't enjoyed as much by fans of the show, and it's not hard to see why. This movie, Blue Gender the Warrior, is essentially a retelling of the series with a few reanimated scenes, a handful of small narrative changes, and a completely original ending. As for the new animation, it's pretty solid. I thought the TV series overall looked pretty good, especially for a late 90s show. Sure, your average episode looked pretty average, but when the show needed to look its best, it did look nice. But it did have a fair amount of fights that didn't look all that great, and this movie fixes that while still keeping to the style of the show so that nothing feels out of place. As for some of the changes from the TV show, a lot of it is small stuff like Yuji having a different haircut at the start, or a few minor characters being absent. But there are a handful of arcs that are either fast-tracked or skipped over for the sake of runtime. This movie is only 1 hour and 40 minutes. That's roughly 50 minutes to cover each half of the show. Except that the movie doesn't actually cover much of the TV show's second half. The last third was completely removed, and the stuff that was included was streamlined even more so than in the first half. Most of the major characters were cut altogether, and the movie ends with a failed New York City operation where, wait a minute, you're not supposed to be there. But yeah, basically a bunch of people die, Yuji has an awakening, and the Blue decide to leave him and Marlene alone, and yeah, that's pretty much how it ends. It's not a very good ending. And it's not a very good movie either. It does have its moments, and I actually do like many of the changes from the TV series. Like how there's more tension between Yuji and Marlene, and at one point she even calls out his backseat moralizing. And I do think that certain sections of the story, like when they assault the base to get to the shuttle, flow better without the added internal conflict between the soldiers because some crazy dude goes and does something crazy. But if you haven't seen the TV show, then every scene will feel disjointed, or like things are just happening now. And if you have seen the TV show, then I don't really see a reason to watch this one. It's not like the Escaflowne film, which is a radically different take on the Escaflowne TV show, both visually and narratively. It's basically just a sped up and slimmed down version of a show that already had some pacing problems, with just a few changes that don't really change much in the grand scheme of things. But now there is one other version of Blue Gender out there, the manga. It came out right before the TV show ended, and it's an even more truncated version of the story than the movie. It only covers the first half of the series, and it tends to combine characters and set pieces to save time. I don't really think it's worth checking out, but it's not that hard to track down if you're curious. And now we return to the question I asked at the start of the video. Is Blue Gender good? In terms of atmosphere and setting, I think it's great. The soundtrack in particular does a phenomenal job at conveying despair and mystery. That one track with the World at War type haunting vocals gets me going every time. Love that song. But as for the story and the characters and the way the show presents its ideas and themes, not the biggest fan, to be honest with you. I feel like I've done a decent job explaining why, but to summarize it with just a single sentence, Blue Gender is an anime with an interesting setup that trips over its characters' corpses and falls on its face at the finish line. But if you're just in the mood for something moody and graphic, then I'd say it's still worth watching. Maybe you disagree with me? I know that Blue Gender still has a pretty dedicated cult following, and I'm sure they will be none too happy with my backhanded compliments, but I just don't quite see what they're seeing in this one. I'd rather watch Starship Troopers again, to be honest with you. But go right ahead and post some paragraphs in the comments. I may not be swayed, but someone else might be. Anyway, until next time, Ave Maria, Deus Vult, and a big thank you to all the cultured.